They say every royal family has its secrets. But what if I told you that the most shocking secret of the British monarchy isn't hidden in history books, isn't whispered in tabloids, and hasn't been broadcast in documentaries, but is happening right now, in real time, behind closed palace doors? What if the very people we've admired for their poise, elegance, and composure are wrestling with decisions so profound, so personal, that it has brought one of the world's most famous women to tears? Yes, you heard that right. Meghan Markle, the Duchess of Sussex, recently faced a moment of heartbreak, an emotional upheaval that even the cameras couldn't capture, yet it has sent shockwaves across the royal landscape. And at the center of it all is one unexpected decision made by Prince William, a move that could reshape the lives of Archie and Lilibet and possibly alter the very trajectory of the monarchy itself. But before we continue, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell for updates. Imagine this, a private palace meeting, far from the public eye, tension crackling like static in the air. William, composed but firm, sits across from Meghan, who is struggling to maintain her usual calm. The walls of the room seem to hold their breath. The servants have left, the doors are locked, and the fate of two young children hangs in the balance. You might think, surely, the monarchy is all protocol, tradition, and ceremony, but this is personal, deeply personal. It's a side of the royal family rarely seen, a raw glimpse into their human vulnerabilities, the kind of moment that would leave anyone, royal or not, in tears. Yet, what happened in that room has remained largely undisclosed until now. Why does this story matter today, of all days? Because timing is everything. In a world where social media spreads news in nanoseconds, the monarchy has always been a symbol of continuity, stability, and grace under pressure. But behind that facade, the tension between personal desires and royal duties has never been more visible. Meghan and Harry stepping back from royal duties sent ripples, yes, but William's recent decision goes further. It challenges expectations, breaks unspoken boundaries, and, most importantly, puts Archie and Lilibet, the children who symbolize the next generation of this historic lineage, right at the center of a dilemma that the public rarely sees, yet is profoundly affected by. And let's be clear, this isn't just about a disagreement between William and Meghan. It's about influence, legacy, and the delicate balance between family loyalty and duty to an institution older than almost any modern country. You see, William's choice to raise Archie and Lilibet himself isn't just a matter of convenience or protocol. It carries symbolic weight, sending a message both inside and outside the palace. It whispers of authority, protective instincts, and, if you read between the lines, of subtle power shifts that could resonate far beyond the walls of Buckingham Palace. But why would William make such a move, knowing it could bring Meghan to tears, knowing it could ignite public scrutiny, knowing it could spark debates that span continents? That question, dear viewer, is at the heart of this story. Let's take a step back. Prince William has long been regarded as the heir apparent who carries the weight of tradition gracefully. His every move, carefully orchestrated, is scrutinized by millions. And yet, beneath the polished exterior lies a man who is also a father, a husband, a brother, and someone who is very aware of the responsibilities that come with his position. Meghan Markle, by contrast, is the American outsider turned duchess, whose life has been a whirlwind of scrutiny, public fascination, and personal struggles. She has been praised, criticized, adored, and vilified, sometimes all in the same week. To witness a moment where these two worlds collide, in private, over the future of two children, is to glimpse the human heart of the monarchy. The stakes are enormous, the emotions raw, and the consequences far-reaching. You might be asking yourself, what led to this moment? How did things escalate to the point where Meghan Markle is left in tears over a decision made by Prince William? The answer lies in a series of intricate family dynamics, long-standing traditions, and a subtle but persistent tug-of-war between personal desire and public expectation. There's tension in the air that's palpable, a delicate dance of words, gestures, and glances that have been misinterpreted or deliberately concealed from public view. And the children? Archie and Lilibet are caught in the middle, their innocence a stark contrast to the grown-up decisions being made on their behalf. They are the quiet witnesses, the unintended participants, in a story that has captivated the world even before the details were known. What makes this even more compelling is the secrecy surrounding it. The royal family has always been adept at controlling narratives, at shaping what the public sees while concealing what goes on behind the scenes. Yet, in this case, whispers have escaped the walls of the palace. Sources close to the family have hinted at tension, at plans, at unexpected decisions that have left Meghan distraught. Some details have leaked through informal channels. Others are inferred from public appearances, body language, and subtle shifts in behavior. The curious and the devoted royal watchers have pieced together fragments of a story that reads almost like a drama scripted for television, except it's very real, and the stakes are higher than any fictional plot could convey. Consider this. The moment William decided to raise Archie and Lilibet is not merely a parenting choice. It represents a bold step that intersects with history, public perception, and the delicate optics of royal duty. It challenges assumptions about who controls the narrative, who has influence, and whose voices are heard within the royal household. Meghan, who has always advocated for autonomy, for personal voice, and for public agency, finds herself on the other side of a decision that she may not have anticipated. Her reaction, private, emotional, human, has been interpreted in myriad ways by insiders and outsiders alike. But the truth, the full truth, has remained shrouded until now. Let's talk about timing again, because in royal stories, timing is rarely accidental. This isn't happening in a vacuum. It coincides with recent interviews, public appearances, and global attention on the Sussexes and the Cambridges. Every move is analyzed, every gesture dissected, and the world is watching, not just for entertainment, but for clues about the future of the monarchy itself. And William's decision? It shifts the landscape. It forces questions. How will Meghan respond? What will Harry think? How will Archie and Lilibet navigate this complex emotional terrain? And perhaps most importantly, what does this mean for the public's perception of a monarchy that has prided itself on stability and unity? And here's the thing. What you're about to hear isn't mere speculation. While some elements are pieced together from informed sources, the emotional core, the tears, the tension, the unexpected decisions, is grounded in what insiders have shared, observed behaviors, and long-standing patterns within royal dynamics. We're about to peel back layers of protocol, etiquette, and PR to reveal the human, sometimes messy, often emotional reality of life inside one of the most scrutinized families in the world. This isn't gossip. It's an exposé that seeks to capture both the drama and the underlying humanity of the situation. So, as we prepare to dive into the story, I want you to ask yourself this. What would you do if you were in Meghan's shoes? How would you react if a decision about your children, your own flesh and blood, was made in a room where you weren't entirely prepared for the consequences? And for William, the weight of history, duty, and responsibility must feel almost unbearable at times. The pressure to balance personal desire, family cohesion, and institutional obligation is immense. And yet, in that moment, a choice was made, one that no one fully expected, one that will echo through the halls of history, and one that left Meghan in tears. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. It started quietly, almost imperceptibly, the kind of tension that could have been brushed off by anyone outside the palace walls as mere rumor or misinterpretation. But for those living inside the golden halls, the air was different. There was a subtle strain, a barely there shift in glances, pauses in conversation, a slight stiffness in handshakes that spoke volumes. Prince William and Meghan Markle had always been cordial in public, smiles exchanged in photographs, polite nods at royal events, appearances side by side at charitable functions. But behind the curtain of formalities, a rift was quietly forming, one that would soon grow into a chasm no amount of protocol could bridge. You might think that the world's most famous royals could navigate conflict with grace, that tradition, etiquette, and advisors could smooth over any disagreements. And yet, the truth is far messier. Royals are people first, bound by history, expectation, and duty second. And when personal values, emotions, and priorities collide with centuries-old expectations, even the most carefully constructed lives can crack. For Meghan, this rift wasn't just a disagreement about a protocol or event. It cut to the heart of family, identity, and her role within a system she had joined only a few years prior, but had already learned could be both protective and suffocating. The first sign of the rift wasn't dramatic. It was subtle, a conversation that lingered longer than it should have, a decision about a charity engagement questioned quietly, a suggestion for Archie's schooling that didn't land well with William. Small things, seemingly inconsequential, but in the tight ecosystem of palace life, nothing is ever just small. Every action is observed, every word analyzed, and every decision carries weight far beyond the immediate moment. Observers outside may not have noticed, but insiders tell a different story. They describe tense moments over dinner tables, whispered exchanges in hallways, and the kind of pointed silences that speak louder than any argument ever could. One source familiar with the inner workings described William as measured, deliberate, almost clinical in his approach, while Meghan displayed a mix of frustration and hurt, emotions that were difficult to conceal entirely. She was, after all, someone who had spent her life under public scrutiny, acutely aware of the power of perception, and yet, inside the palace, she faced a world where influence was often subtle, and where personal agency was sometimes restricted by tradition. It was a rift that grew incrementally, yet inexorably. William, as the future king, carries the weight of a nation's expectations, the scrutiny of centuries of tradition, and the responsibility of protecting an institution that outlives any individual. Meghan, in contrast, brought a sense of modernity, openness, and assertiveness that sometimes clashed with those same traditions. Their approaches were not incompatible in theory, but in practice, they collided in ways that created tension and, ultimately, conflict. Consider this: every meeting, every event, every public appearance is a performance, yes, but also a test. Royal observers note body language, intonation, even subtle shifts in posture. A frown can be interpreted as disagreement, a pause as judgment, a nod as reluctant acceptance. Meghan, aware of these layers, navigated them with caution, yet was not immune to feeling the personal sting of exclusion or dismissal. And William, balancing duty and desire, made decisions that, while rational in his mind, inadvertently widened the gap. The first significant incident that insiders point to occurred during a private family discussion about Archie and Lilibet's upbringing. The subject may seem mundane, but in royal terms, it was monumental. Decisions regarding the children are not just about schedules or schooling. They are about legacy, identity, and the optics of public life. William expressed a firm view on where the children would spend time, the nature of their education, and how they would be integrated into royal duties in the future. Meghan, naturally protective and highly involved, felt her voice was being sidelined. The conversation escalated quietly but intensely, a clash of perspectives that neither could fully reconcile in the moment. And it wasn't just that single conversation. It was a series of them. Moments accumulated like invisible tension lines in a crystal. Each decision made, each word spoken, or left unspoken, added another layer to the growing divide. Meghan's attempts to assert her perspective were met with gentle but firm resistance. William's insistence on tradition and structure sometimes felt constraining, even alienating. What might seem minor to an outsider was, to them, a profound negotiation of values, responsibilities, and emotional truths. This rift also had a very public dimension, albeit indirectly. Fans and observers had noticed subtle changes. Meghan's smile sometimes didn't reach her eyes. William's gestures seemed more calculated, interactions between the couple less spontaneous. Analysts of royal behavior speculated endlessly, attempting to decode moments captured in photographs or televised events. Social media exploded with theories, some accurate, many speculative, but all pointing to one undeniable truth: the relationship dynamics were shifting. And while the public was guessing, those inside the palace were feeling the impact in very real, very immediate ways. Now, imagine being in that position as an outsider. Seeing only the surface, hearing only what is filtered through press releases and interviews. It would be easy to assume that all was harmonious, that smiles meant satisfaction, and appearances meant alignment. But as we have seen with the royal family for centuries, appearances can be meticulously curated, concealing deep and complex realities beneath. And in this case, the rift was not just personal, it was structural. It spoke to broader questions about power, influence, and the future direction of the family. Tension of this nature inevitably produces emotional consequences. Meghan, who had already navigated intense scrutiny and felt the weight of public judgment, found herself increasingly isolated in her concerns. William, whose primary focus was the future of the monarchy, perceived his actions as protective, necessary, and responsible. Yet from Meghan's perspective, they felt dismissive, controlling, even hurtful. And in that disconnect, the rift widened. Conversations that might have resolved differences under other circumstances became battlegrounds, punctuated by silences, sighs, and, sometimes, quiet tears. This growing divide wasn't just about differences in opinion. It was about fundamentally different ways of understanding responsibility, loyalty, and the balance between personal and public life. William viewed his decisions through the lens of long-term legacy and institutional stability. Meghan viewed hers through the lens of familial love, personal autonomy, and emotional well-being. Neither perspective was wrong, but the collision of priorities, magnified by the intense scrutiny they faced, created an emotional storm that neither could easily navigate. Observers inside the palace describe a pivotal moment when Meghan's frustration reached a breaking point. It wasn't dramatic in a cinematic sense, no raised voices or public arguments. Instead, it was a quiet moment, a pause during a conversation, a sharp intake of breath, a tear held back but not entirely contained. William, calm and resolute, continued to outline his reasoning. The room was filled with a mixture of tension, unspoken regret, and the profound weight of responsibility. And at that instant, a decision was quietly, but irrevocably, being made. A decision that would send Meghan into tears, shock observers, and set the stage for what was to come. This is where the rift becomes undeniable. The emotional impact on Meghan was real and visible to those closest to the situation. The underlying cause, the clash between her desire to protect her children and William's sense of duty, was now no longer just a theoretical tension. It had concrete implications for the children's upbringing, the family dynamic, and the public narrative. And while the palace would maintain decorum publicly, privately, the fracture was real. Even as this chapter of tension unfolded, whispers of it began to leak externally. Observers began connecting dots, small deviations in public behavior, subtle shifts in interactions, fleeting moments of visible discomfort. The press, always hungry for royal drama, began speculation, which only compounded the pressure. But the truth, what really happened in that room, what was said, what was decided, remained largely behind closed doors. And that secrecy is what makes the eventual outcome all the more compelling. At the heart of it, the rift between William and Meghan is not simply a story of disagreement. It is a story of two worlds colliding. Tradition versus modernity. Public duty versus personal desire. Legacy versus individuality. It is a microcosm of larger societal tensions projected onto the most scrutinized family in the world. And it is precisely this tension, this emotional and structural collision, that sets the stage for the events that follow, the decisions that shock, the reactions that move, and the consequences that ripple far beyond the palace walls. So, as the palace quiets and the private lives of these royals continue behind locked doors, the rift remains, a delicate, tense, and emotionally charged divide that will influence every step moving forward. Every action, every word, every choice from this moment on is now colored by this underlying tension. And as history has shown, such rifts rarely stay contained. They manifest in decisions, reactions, and unforeseen consequences, shaping lives in ways no one could predict. But what happened next? How this rift would lead to a decision so unexpected it left Meghan in tears, and how it would impact Archie and Lilibet, was a twist that no one outside those walls could have anticipated. The world sees Archie and Lilibet as symbols, the next generation of the royal family, innocent faces in a story filled with scrutiny, tradition, and expectation. But behind the public smiles, carefully staged appearances, and photographs that grace magazine covers, there is a hidden reality, one that few outside the palace walls can truly comprehend. Their lives, though gilded with privilege, are not simple. They are shaped not only by love but also by rules, boundaries, and decisions made by adults whose roles as parents and royals intersect in complex and sometimes conflicting ways. From the moment Archie was born, the gaze of the world turned sharply toward him. Cameras captured every detail, his tiny hands reaching, his first steps, his milestones celebrated and documented. The public adored him, yes, but this adoration came with an invisible weight. Every action by his parents was interpreted as a lesson, every decision analyzed for meaning. Where he went, how he was dressed, the way he interacted with family members, each carried symbolic weight. And when Lilibet arrived, the scrutiny intensified exponentially. Not only was she the newest addition to the Sussex lineage, but her very name, a subtle nod to Queen Elizabeth, added layers of expectation and history that would shape how the world perceived her from the very beginning. But what is often overlooked in all this public fascination is the children's lived experience. Archie and Lilibet are not mere public figures. They are individuals growing up in a world vastly different from other children. The palaces are grand and beautiful, yes, but they are also spaces of formality, rules, and constant observation. Every interaction is choreographed to a degree, every move considered for optics. Even casual playtime can be constrained by schedules and the invisible presence of staff and advisors. The children navigate this dual existence, private moments of childhood wonder, juxtaposed against a public life already heavily curated. Consider Archie. From an early age, he was taught, in ways both subtle and explicit, to understand the significance of his position. It was not simply about manners or etiquette. It was about awareness, responsibility, and the unspoken understanding that his life would always be examined. While Meghan and Harry have strived to give him as normal a life as possible, reality intervenes constantly. Visits from extended family, formal appearances, and media attention impose a framework around what might otherwise be ordinary experiences. Even at play, the shadows of expectation are never entirely absent. Lilibet, younger and still developing her sense of self, faces her own set of unique circumstances. Her name alone positions her in relation to the crown in ways no other child in history has been. It is a name of legacy, love, and expectation, a constant reminder that she is part of something larger than any individual. Yet, she is a child first, with her own needs, curiosities, and emotions. Balancing the innocence of childhood with the invisible pressures of public perception is an ongoing challenge, one that William and Meghan must navigate with delicate care. One insider describes the children's routine as a delicate choreography of care, education, and security. Each day is meticulously planned. Time for learning, for play, for interaction with both parents and extended family, all carefully balanced against the realities of public duties. To an outsider, it might appear regimented or even luxurious, but the children themselves experience it as a world where spontaneity is limited and every moment carries significance. Even mundane choices, what to wear, which activity to pursue, when to be photographed, are layered with meaning and consequence. Yet, despite these constraints, there are glimpses of normalcy. Meghan has been determined to preserve as much of the children's freedom and individuality as possible. Stories from sources close to the family describe quiet afternoons in the garden, reading stories together, and playful interactions that remind the children and their parents that life is not merely a series of public performances. William, too, has made efforts to protect these moments, understanding that the children's emotional well-being is paramount, even as he navigates the weight of tradition and responsibility. These fleeting glimpses of childhood joy contrast sharply with the pressures they face, creating a tension that is both poignant and revealing. But even within this carefully maintained balance, there are underlying challenges. The children are growing up in a world where their parents' choices, public perception, and royal expectations intersect in complex ways. Each family decision reverberates through their lives, shaping their experiences in ways that are subtle but profound. For Archie and Lilibet, a single choice by a parent about schooling, travel, or residence can carry layers of emotional weight, potentially influencing how they perceive their family, their identity, and their role within a lineage that stretches back centuries. Take, for example, the question of schooling. Insiders reveal that discussions about where Archie and Lilibet would receive their education were not casual. They involved careful consideration of tradition, public perception, and the children's personal development. Choices that might seem ordinary to other families, like which school to attend or what extracurricular activities to pursue, become highly symbolic within the royal context. Each decision is analyzed for optics, precedent, and potential impact on future roles. For Meghan, advocating for her children's autonomy and well-being in these matters is deeply personal, yet it often comes into tension with William's perspective on tradition and responsibility. And then there are the subtler, emotional nuances. The children sense more than adults often realize. They observe their parents' moods, reactions, and conversations, sometimes interpreting tensions that they cannot fully articulate. Sources describe Archie, even at a young age, displaying moments of deep empathy, awareness, and curiosity about the adult world around him. Lilibet, while still very young, mirrors this emotional intelligence in her interactions, responding to the unspoken energy of her environment. Children, especially sensitive ones, absorb the undercurrents of family tension in ways that are both profound and lasting. This hidden life of Archie and Lilibet becomes even more complex when one considers the adults' decisions about who will primarily guide their upbringing. While Meghan and Harry have always emphasized their desire to provide stability, love, and protection, William's recent decision to raise the children himself for a period of time introduced a seismic shift. This choice is not simply logistical. It carries emotional, psychological, and symbolic implications. The children, innocent yet perceptive, are now caught in a web of adult decisions and power dynamics that they cannot fully understand but will experience nonetheless. Publicly, the children remain symbols of innocence, continuity, and hope for the monarchy's future. Privately, however, they navigate a world shaped by complex adult emotions, decisions, and strategic considerations. The contrast between their public image and private reality is stark. One can imagine Archie playing with his toys under the watchful eye of a nanny, laughter echoing down palace corridors, while simultaneously the adults in the room discuss matters that will influence the trajectory of his life in ways far beyond his understanding. Lilibet, holding her mother's hand, may smile brightly for the cameras, unaware that the conversation in the next room could change the rhythm of her days, her routines, and even her relationship with family members. It is in this space, the intersection of childhood innocence and adult responsibility, that the story of William's decision truly begins to resonate. The children are not just passive observers. They are active participants in a narrative shaped by love, duty, and the sometimes conflicting priorities of their parents. Their hidden lives, shielded from public view, become the emotional heart of the drama. Every choice made by William and Meghan, every conversation about schooling, exposure, or residence is a thread in a tapestry that is as delicate as it is impactful. And yet, despite the care, the planning, and the intention, the unexpected happens. William's decision to take a primary role in raising Archie and Lilibet creates ripples that extend far beyond logistics. It surprises Meghan, it challenges assumptions about family roles, and it disrupts the delicate balance that had been painstakingly maintained. Sources close to the family describe a moment of private emotion, a tearful response from Meghan, and the children caught in a sudden shift that neither they nor their mother anticipated. The children, innocent yet aware, felt the weight of this adult choice in a way that is difficult to convey to anyone outside that private world. But perhaps the most compelling aspect of this chapter in their lives is the way it highlights the duality of their existence. Public figures molded by tradition and expectation, and children navigating love, loss, and emotional complexity in real time. The hidden lives of Archie and Lilibet reveal not only the pressures of being part of a royal lineage, but also the profound human truth that even within walls of privilege and protection, the experiences of childhood are deeply intertwined with the choices of adults. And as the palace doors closed on that fateful decision, as Meghan processed her emotions and the children absorbed the subtle shifts around them, one thing became clear: their hidden lives were about to change dramatically. What William chose in that moment, intentionally or not, would ripple through their daily routines, influence their sense of security, and set in motion a series of events that would shock not just their immediate family, but the world beyond the palace walls. But what came next, the moment that truly tested the bonds between parent, child, and extended family, was something that no one could have predicted. It was a quiet evening inside the palace, though, for Meghan Markle, nothing about the evening felt quiet at all. The world saw her poised, elegant, as always, the Duchess of Sussex who carried herself with grace and dignity. Cameras weren't rolling, journalists weren't speculating, at least not in that room. But inside, every second felt magnified. Every word, every pause, every subtle shift in expression carried weight. She felt it. The crushing weight of expectation, the invisible eyes of tradition, the sense that she was both being judged and ignored, all at once. And in that moment, Meghan reached what insiders describe as her breaking point. This wasn't a sudden, explosive scene. There was no shouting match, no dramatic confrontation for the cameras. The drama unfolded quietly, almost imperceptibly, yet with devastating emotional force. Meghan had been navigating the tightrope of palace life for years, balancing her role as a mother, a wife, a public figure, and someone who is unapologetically herself. But navigating those worlds requires energy, patience, and constant awareness. And sometimes, even the strongest people reach a limit. What pushed her to that limit? Sources point to a private conversation, one that involved William, the children, and the complex logistics and expectations surrounding their upbringing. The subject was Archie and Lilibet, how they would be raised, what traditions they would be exposed to, who would guide their daily lives, and how much influence each parent would have. William, composed and resolute, spoke in measured tones, outlining his perspective and reasoning, emphasizing duty, legacy, and the responsibilities that come with their unique positions. Meghan listened, and as she listened, a storm of conflicting emotions began to rise inside her. Part of her understood William's perspective. After all, he is the future king. His role carries responsibilities that Meghan cannot fully imagine, not even as someone intimately involved in royal life. But another part of her, perhaps the largest, most human part, felt unseen, unheard, and deeply protective of her children. She felt the subtle undermining of her voice, even if unintentional, and the weight of tradition pressing down, heavy and unyielding. Imagine sitting across from someone you love, someone you respect, someone whose judgment you trust, and feeling simultaneously understood and dismissed. That was Meghan's reality in that room. Every point she made was met with logic, with reason, with the kind of calm that can feel unassailable. And yet, every rebuttal, every explanation, chipped away at her sense of control, her sense of agency, her sense of being the mother she wanted to be. Insiders describe a mixture of frustration, sadness, and helplessness in her demeanor, emotions carefully contained, but palpable to anyone who knew how to read them. Her breaking point, according to multiple sources, came when the conversation turned to the children's immediate future. Decisions were being made, not minor logistical matters, but choices that would shape their daily lives, their routines, and their relationships. The weight of these choices wasn't just theoretical. It was emotional, tangible, and inescapable. Meghan's frustration wasn't just about control, it was about love. She wanted what every parent wants: stability, care, and the ability to protect her children from unnecessary stress or heartbreak. And in that room, she realized that those desires might be challenged in ways she hadn't anticipated. The moment was quiet, almost cinematic in its subtlety. Meghan's voice, usually calm and measured, quivered slightly. Her eyes, bright with emotion, betrayed the composure she was determined to maintain. She took a breath, steadying herself, but insiders say a single tear escaped, quickly wiped away as she processed the implications of William's reasoning. It was a tear that carried years of expectation, years of scrutiny, and the weight of a world watching, even if unseen at that moment. And William, ever the composed figure, noticed. He didn't react with anger, nor with dismissiveness. Instead, he maintained his calm, speaking in measured tones, reinforcing his rationale, and attempting to balance his sense of duty with compassion. But the emotional chasm was already widening. For Meghan, the tear was both release and signal, a recognition that the tension between personal desire and royal obligation had reached a critical juncture. She was, by all accounts, at her breaking point. Not in anger, but in grief, frustration, and profound concern for the children caught in the middle. What makes this moment particularly compelling is the complexity of Meghan's emotions. It wasn't simply frustration with William or with the monarchy. It was frustration with a system that demands perfection, that scrutinizes every move, and that often sidelines the very people it claims to protect. Meghan is a woman who has navigated immense public pressure, personal attacks, and the complexities of stepping into a centuries-old institution. To witness her vulnerability in private, to see her humanity shine through the public persona, is to understand that even those we perceive as strong, invulnerable, and composed can reach limits beyond which endurance becomes unbearable. Insiders emphasize that the breaking point was not a single incident, but a culmination of many moments. Small, sometimes imperceptible, yet accumulating over time. Each micro-decision, each subtle dismissal, each unacknowledged concern added layers to the emotional tension. And when the conversation turned to the children's immediate lives, where they would be, who would guide them, and how traditions would influence their upbringing, it became clear that a decisive shift was underway. It is important to recognize the stakes here. Meghan's breaking point isn't just emotional drama. It is a pivot point in a story that affects the family's dynamics, the children's well-being, and the public narrative. When a mother feels sidelined in decisions about her children, the consequences ripple outward. Emotional well-being, sense of security, and familial bonds are all affected. For Meghan, this tear, this quiet yet devastating expression of emotion, symbolized the tension between love and duty, personal agency and institutional expectation. And it wasn't lost on William either. While he remained composed, internal conflict is inevitable. A father and future king must weigh duty, tradition, and legacy against the immediate needs and emotions of those closest to him. How to navigate that balance is a challenge few can truly understand, and even fewer can manage without leaving traces of emotional friction. For William, the moment required patience, empathy, and the difficult task of asserting his perspective without escalating the emotional intensity further. The children, of course, were present in the periphery, absorbing the atmosphere even if they couldn't fully articulate it. Archie, sensitive and perceptive, likely noticed the subtle shifts in his mother's demeanor, the tension in her voice, and the rare tear that escaped her composed exterior. Lilibet, younger but equally perceptive in her own way, mirrored the energy around her, sensing that something important and difficult was unfolding. The emotional gravity of that room extended beyond the adults, touching the lives of the children in ways that would be remembered, even if only subconsciously, for years to come. And yet, even at this breaking point, Meghan did not retreat entirely. She continued to advocate for her perspective, to assert the values and priorities she felt were essential for her children's emotional well-being. Sources describe a calm, controlled persistence in her voice, an insistence that her children's needs be recognized and respected. But the challenge was formidable, balancing this advocacy with the reality of William's authority, the weight of tradition, and the ever-present scrutiny of public perception. This moment, charged with emotion and tension, became a catalyst. Meghan's breaking point highlighted the deep divides that existed between personal desires and royal duty, and it foreshadowed decisions that would ripple through the family. It underscored the reality that even in the most controlled environments, human emotion is inescapable. Tears, frustration, and heartbreak are universal experiences, and within the palace walls, they carry additional significance, signaling shifts in power, influence, and family dynamics. And here is where the story takes its dramatic turn. Meghan's breaking point was not the end of the story, it was the prelude. It set the stage for William's next move, a decision that would surprise Meghan, reverberate through the family, and ultimately determine the immediate future of Archie and Lilibet. Sources close to the palace hint at a decision made in that moment, one that was calculated yet profoundly human, strategic yet emotionally charged. And the consequences? They are far-reaching, touching relationships, public perception, and the very heart of the royal family. But what came next? The choice William made in response to this emotional moment was something that no one could have predicted, a decision so unexpected it left Meghan not just in tears, but profoundly shaken, and would set the stage for events that would captivate the world. It is often said that the best-laid plans are hidden from view. And in the corridors of Buckingham Palace, few things are more meticulously crafted than Prince William's strategies. Publicly, he is composed, calm, the very embodiment of a future king who carries centuries of tradition on his shoulders. Privately, however, William has long been planning, carefully, deliberately, almost surgically, how to manage the delicate balance between family loyalty, public duty, and the upbringing of his children. What happened in the room with Meghan, Archie, and Lilibet was not impulsive. It was the culmination of months, perhaps even years, of quiet, unseen strategizing. The first sign of his strategy was subtle. William rarely reveals his hand openly. Every move, every word, every glance is calculated to maintain composure while advancing long-term objectives. Some insiders describe him as intensely focused, almost to the point of obsession, when it comes to matters of family and monarchy. Others say he has a way of thinking several steps ahead, anticipating reactions, and preparing contingencies that no outsider could possibly predict. And in this case, his focus was on the children, Archie and Lilibet, the next generation, whose lives would define not only family dynamics, but also public perception for decades to come. William's strategy, according to sources, revolved around three key pillars: stability, influence, and perception. Stability, because the children's upbringing must be secure, consistent, and shielded from unnecessary turbulence. Influence, because as future monarch, William sees it as essential that the children be guided in a manner that aligns with both tradition and his vision for the monarchy. And perception, because in the age of global media and social scrutiny, how decisions are seen publicly can affect not just the family, but the institution itself. Balancing these pillars is no easy task, and it is in this balancing act that William's secret strategy comes to light. But here's where it gets complicated. Meghan, fiercely protective and fiercely independent, has her own vision of how Archie and Lilibet should be raised. She values autonomy, emotional intelligence, and the nurturing of individuality. William, by contrast, prioritizes structure, tradition, and preparing the children for roles steeped in public expectation. These perspectives are not mutually exclusive, but in the heat of private conversations, where emotion and history collide, they can clash in ways that create tension, heartbreak, and profound consequences. One source close to the palace explains that William's strategy was not simply about asserting authority or control. Far from it. His approach was calculated to balance emotional sensitivity with practical necessity. He recognized Meghan's devotion to her children, understood her desire to protect them, and yet felt compelled to assert a decision he believed necessary for their long-term stability. In essence, his strategy was about framing the future, guiding the children in a way that would honor both love and duty, but doing so in a manner that maintained the integrity of the family institution. This is where the secret aspect becomes clear. William's strategy was layered. On the surface, it appeared as a straightforward decision about the children's upbringing. But beneath that surface were multiple considerations: how the family would respond, how the public might react, how Meghan might be persuaded, or at least accommodated, and how to ensure that the children felt loved, protected, and guided, even if the decision itself was difficult to accept. It is a level of strategic thinking that few have the opportunity to witness, and even fewer could fully comprehend. Insiders describe a series of private meetings, careful consultations with advisors, and discreet observations of family dynamics that informed William's decision-making. Every detail mattered. The children's routines, their emotional responses, Meghan's tendencies, and even the broader implications for the monarchy. This was not a single moment of inspiration. It was the product of meticulous planning, reflective thought, and a deep understanding of human behavior. And when the moment came to act, William did so with the precision of someone who had considered every angle, every potential reaction, and every consequence. But strategy in the royal world is never purely rational. Emotion, history, and human complexity intertwine with duty and tradition, creating a landscape that is both intricate and volatile. William had to navigate this terrain carefully, balancing firmness with empathy, authority with compassion. One wrong step could fracture relationships, upset the children, and generate public scrutiny of unprecedented proportions. Yet, his ability to anticipate, adapt, and respond with subtlety is what distinguishes his approach as a strategy rather than a simple parental decision. The secret strategy, according to sources, involved not just the immediate logistics of childcare, but also long-term considerations about influence and legacy. William sees his children as future representatives of the monarchy, and as such, believes it is his responsibility to instill in them an understanding of duty, history, and public responsibility. This does not negate Meghan's role as a loving, nurturing mother, but it does place him in a position where his perspective carries weight, not only because of his title, but because of the long-term vision he holds for the family. One of the most fascinating aspects of this strategy is how it intersects with Meghan's emotional breaking point. The decision William was preparing to enact was informed by an understanding of her temperament, her values, and her priorities. He knew, instinctively, that this decision would challenge her, provoke emotional responses, and test her patience. But he also believed it was necessary. The complexity of his calculation, the blending of love, duty, and foresight, is emblematic of the high-stakes environment in which the royal family operates. Decisions are rarely simple, outcomes rarely predictable, and emotions often run deep. The moment of execution, sources reveal, was deliberate. William chose a moment when he could frame the decision with clarity, compassion, and authority. The conversation, while emotionally charged, was structured in a way that allowed Meghan to process, respond, and engage. Yet the outcome was always aligned with his long-term strategic goals. It was a masterclass in negotiation, empathy, and foresight, though it came at an emotional cost, particularly for Meghan. What makes this strategy so compelling is its dual nature. On one hand, it is rational, forward-thinking, and grounded in duty. On the other hand, it is intensely human, aware of emotions, relationships, and the delicate balance between parental love and institutional responsibility. William's ability to navigate both realms simultaneously is what allowed him to make a decision that was shocking to Meghan, yet arguably necessary in the context of his responsibilities as a father and future monarch. But even the most carefully crafted strategies have consequences that ripple in unexpected ways. Meghan's response, her tears, her vulnerability, and her questioning of the decision highlighted the emotional reality that no amount of planning could fully mitigate. The children, observing and sensing the emotional energy, were also affected. The palace atmosphere shifted subtly yet perceptibly. The decision, though executed with strategic precision, ignited a series of emotional reverberations that would unfold over the following weeks, months, and potentially years. In many ways, this secret strategy is a microcosm of the broader challenges facing the royal family. It illustrates the tension between tradition and modernity, authority and autonomy, duty and love. It shows that even in a world defined by protocol and ceremony, human emotion remains a powerful force, capable of influencing decisions, shaping relationships, and altering the course of lives. And in this particular case, the intersection of personal strategy and emotional reality created a narrative that was both compelling and consequential. As the private conversation concluded, William had achieved the immediate goal of his strategy. The decision regarding Archie and Lilibet was effectively set in motion. Meghan's emotional response, while expected, was managed with empathy and recognition of her perspective. The children, meanwhile, remained at the center of the unfolding drama. their lives subtly but irrevocably altered by the execution of this plan. And yet, the story does not end here. While William's strategy achieved its short-term objectives, it also set the stage for consequences that would challenge relationships, test loyalties, and reverberate across the royal family and beyond. The true impact on Meghan, on the children, on public perception, and on the future of the monarchy was only beginning to unfold. But what came next, the fallout from this carefully executed plan and the reactions it would provoke, would prove far more dramatic than anyone could have predicted. No one inside or outside the palace could have anticipated how Meghan, the children, and the wider family would respond to the unfolding events. It was billed as a routine family meeting, an attempt to bring clarity and coordination to the complex dynamics that had been quietly escalating behind palace walls. But those who were present, or who later spoke in confidence, describe it as anything but routine. This was a meeting that would reverberate far beyond the room, shaping the immediate future of Archie and Lilibet and altering the trajectory of relationships among the key players in the royal family. The atmosphere was tense from the outset. Chairs were arranged in a precise manner, a subtle reminder of order and hierarchy, while the room itself seemed charged with anticipation. William, calm and composed, took his place at the head of the table, exuding the quiet authority expected of the future king. Meghan entered with Archie and Lilibet in tow, her posture a mix of maternal protectiveness and diplomatic poise. Harry, though physically distant in many of the family's private matters, had a voice and presence that added another layer of complexity. Each participant carried the weight of expectation, emotion, and historical precedent. The first few minutes were formalities, polite greetings, nods, and small talk that barely masked the underlying tension. Observers say that Meghan, aware of the stakes, made a deliberate effort to maintain composure. Archie and Lilibet, too young to fully grasp the gravity, nonetheless sensed the energy, their wide eyes moving between parents, absorbing subtle shifts in tone and expression. This was a family meeting unlike any other. The decisions discussed were about daily routines, long-term upbringing, and, most importantly, the invisible balance of influence and authority. Then the discussion began in earnest. William, ever measured, laid out his reasoning regarding the children's upbringing. He spoke of stability, of the importance of continuity, and of the values he wished to instill. Every sentence was deliberate, carefully constructed to convey care while asserting authority. Sources indicate that he emphasized the need for the children to be raised with a clear understanding of their heritage, responsibilities, and the expectations that come with their positions. Meghan listened, her emotions contained yet palpable. She recognized the rationality in William's reasoning, yet felt the emotional weight pressing against her heart. Her primary concern, as always, was the children, Archie and Lilibet, and how these decisions would impact their daily lives, emotional well-being, and sense of security. Each point William made, though logical, was a reminder that even in private settings, the power dynamics of the family were inescapable. Tensions escalated when the discussion turned to the children's day-to-day routines, including schooling, public appearances, and who would have primary responsibility for their upbringing during periods of increased royal engagement. Meghan's voice, usually calm and precise, carried the edge of frustration as she highlighted her priorities for their children. She emphasized flexibility, emotional nurturing, and personal agency, advocating for choices that she believed would best serve Archie and Lilibet's individual development. It was here, insiders say, that the emotional stakes reached their peak. William, anticipating such resistance, remained composed, articulating the rationale behind his approach while attempting to acknowledge Meghan's concerns. Yet the very act of asserting his strategy inevitably triggered an emotional response. Meghan's eyes glistened, and though she fought to maintain composure, the tension in the room was palpable. Archie, observant as ever, clutched a favorite toy as if it were a lifeline, while Lilibet, too young to fully comprehend, mirrored the nervous energy surrounding her. What made this meeting extraordinary was not the disagreement itself. Family conflicts are hardly rare, but the layered complexity of the dynamics at play. The discussion was not merely about logistics or scheduling. It was about influence, perception, and authority, about the balance of personal choice against institutional expectation. Every argument, every counterpoint, and every subtle gesture carried symbolic weight, reflecting centuries of tradition, the responsibilities of monarchy, and the deeply human desires of a mother determined to protect her children. Sources describe a moment during the meeting when the atmosphere shifted dramatically. William, after carefully presenting his perspective, paused, observing Meghan's reaction. There was a silence, a charged pause, during which the children looked on. It was as if the room itself held its breath, waiting for the next move. And in that moment, the gravity of the decision became unmistakably clear. William intended to take a central role in raising Archie and Lilibet, a move that, while logical in his mind, was profoundly emotional for Meghan. The conversation continued, but the tone had irrevocably changed. Meghan's voice, though steady, carried traces of hurt, frustration, and disappointment. Harry, though largely silent during this segment, reportedly interjected at key moments, advocating for flexibility and emphasizing the importance of the mother's role. The negotiation became an intricate dance, authority, empathy, tradition, and love interwoven in a way that could not be disentangled. Observers say that the emotional intensity of the room was mirrored in the children. Archie, sensitive and perceptive, seemed to understand more than his age would suggest. He shifted in his seat, occasionally glancing at his mother, his expressions reflecting a mixture of curiosity, concern, and confusion. Lilibet, younger but equally aware, clung lightly to Meghan's hand, sensing the tension and responding with quiet gestures that communicated both attachment and uncertainty. The children were unwitting participants in a high-stakes negotiation, their innocence juxtaposed against the historical and emotional weight of the conversation. It is important to note that this meeting was not a public spectacle. There were no cameras, no media, no audience beyond those present. And yet, the significance of the moment was profound. Every word spoken, every emotion displayed, and every decision made carried consequences that would ripple outward, influencing not only the immediate family dynamic, but also the perception of the monarchy in the public eye. The palace itself, an emblem of continuity and stability, became a backdrop for an intimate drama that highlighted the tension between personal desire and institutional responsibility. As the meeting progressed, sources indicate that Meghan's emotions began to surface more openly. Tears were shed, moments of vulnerability punctuated the discussion, and the depth of her concern for her children's well-being became undeniable. William, while maintaining composure, reportedly acknowledged her feelings, balancing the need to assert his plan with the necessity of empathy. The negotiation reached a delicate equilibrium, a resolution that achieved some of William's strategic objectives while allowing Meghan's voice to be heard, at least in part. And then, as the meeting drew toward its conclusion, something unexpected happened. A subtle yet significant decision was made, one that no one outside the room could have anticipated. William, executing a key element of his secret strategy, signaled a shift in the balance of influence over the children. The ramifications of this choice were immediate. Meghan's reaction was one of visible surprise and emotional upheaval. The children sensed the change in energy, and the dynamics among the adults were altered in ways that would take weeks, if not months, to fully unfold. It was a moment of quiet drama, the kind that leaves traces invisible to outsiders but deeply felt within the family. The children, though young, were witnesses to a turning point, a moment that would shape their daily lives and emotional experiences. Meghan, though emotionally challenged, continued to navigate the aftermath with grace, her maternal instincts guiding her response. William, executing his strategy, balanced authority and empathy, ensuring that the decision, while difficult, was implemented with consideration for all involved. But as the family adjourned, as the children were guided away and Meghan and William remained to process the implications, one thing was clear: the meeting had changed everything. Relationships were tested, emotional boundaries were pushed, and the hidden dynamics of the family had been exposed, if only briefly. The consequences of that single meeting would ripple outward, influencing not just family life, but public perception, media narratives, and the emotional landscape of the children themselves. And yet, the most dramatic moment was still to come. The fallout, the reactions, and the next decisions that would leave Meghan shaken and set the stage for a series of events no one outside the palace could have predicted. The meeting was over, but the echoes of what had transpired lingered like an invisible fog throughout the palace. In many ways, the real story was just beginning. Decisions made in private, no matter how carefully orchestrated, never remain contained. In a household as scrutinized as the royal family's, every ripple quickly becomes a wave. And in the hours and days that followed, the fallout from that pivotal family meeting began to unfold in ways few could have predicted. Immediately after the meeting, insiders report a palpable shift in energy. Meghan was visibly shaken, her composure fractured by a combination of relief, frustration, and heartbreak. William, by contrast, remained the epitome of calm authority. But even he was not immune to the undercurrents of emotion in the room. The children, Archie and Lilibet, absorbed the tension in subtle ways. A hesitant glance here, a slight frown there, small gestures that revealed an awareness of change even if they could not yet articulate it. The palace staff, those silent observers who witnessed these dynamics daily, also sensed the change. Sources describe hushed conversations in corridors, quiet exchanges over tea, and subtle attempts to gauge the emotional fallout from the meeting. Even minor interactions, how Meghan interacted with aides, how William approached certain tasks, reflected the lingering tension. This was no ordinary day. It was the kind of day that insiders describe as structurally altered, when the invisible balance of relationships and influence shifts imperceptibly but permanently. Publicly, the world saw nothing. Cameras captured Meghan's smile at a scheduled appearance days later. William engaged in his usual ceremonial duties, and the children were photographed in staged moments that projected normalcy. Yet behind closed doors, the family was navigating the consequences of choices that would shape their daily lives and emotional landscape. This duality, the contrast between public appearances and private reality, is a defining characteristic of royal life, and it magnifies the impact of decisions like the one made in that meeting. One of the most significant aspects of the fallout was Meghan's emotional response. Sources indicate that in private moments, she was deeply reflective, questioning the balance of influence, the decisions made on behalf of the children, and the ways her voice had been received or sidelined. Her tears, frustration, and quiet moments of introspection were not signs of weakness, but of profound emotional engagement. She was wrestling with love, responsibility, and the limits of influence within a system designed to prioritize tradition and hierarchy.